And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, January 23rd. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, an organization's new name signals a broader mission to support both Airmen and Guardians. Plus, an interesting case at the Court of Federal Appeals could shape future energy savings performance contracts. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Department of Veterans Affairs is getting ready to award what's likely to become one of the biggest service contracts in government history, possibly $1 trillion over the next decade. It's the follow-on contract vehicle for the private sector healthcare services VA started paying for under the Mission Act. Officials say it will bring more rigorous management to the department's role as a healthcare payer, but members of Congress have questions and say they were left in the dark about the contract right up until the moment VA issued the RFP last month. Federal News Network's Jared Serbu is here with details.
The massive contract vehicle represents only the second time VA has signed large contracts with health plans to coordinate private sector care for veterans. The first was shortly after the Mission Act was signed in 2018. Those contracts are now expiring, and VA wants to replace them with what it says will be a much more rigorous approach to program management. Richard Topping is VA's Assistant Secretary for Management and Chief Financial Officer.
This program has been unmanaged since its inception, so none of the tools, none of the controls that we are talking about and introducing here have been available for. So VA had no ability to manage this program, to drive quality, to focus on the outcomes for veterans, to focus on cost. We've now got the ability to do that in this contract, so that's number one. Number two, the way we designed this unmanaged program made it very difficult for industry to partner with us. It made it very difficult for community providers to serve our veterans. It made it difficult for our TPAs because it didn't operate like any other payer program, which made it one-off anomalies. That made it difficult to be part of this.
The new contract, called Community Care Network Next Generation, is meant to be different. VA says the department intends to cast a wide net for vendors, creating an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract that doesn't only attract large national health insurers.
We are very much intentionally not limiting the large vendors. The intention and the ability to use the IDIQ is to open this up to competition to non-large vendors, but to those who might bring regional capabilities, regional capacity, that would not be able to operate on a national or semi-national scale. We want those vendors on the vehicle. They will incur a cost to bid and be awarded a spot on the vehicle. But once they do that, the vendors who are on the vehicle with us, large and small, have a seat at the table with VA, with our program management team, to design those next task orders. There are 2 initial task orders in the initial award. Those look a lot like what we have now, large, regional. But we are going to immediately partner with the vendors on the vehicle to begin to build the next more regional, more adaptable, more local models in our task orders.
VA plans to use the IDIQ contract for its purchased health care for up to 10 years. The contract includes a 3-year base period, followed by 3 2-year option periods, and a final 1-year option period. During that time, the department plans to use on-ramps and off-ramps to bring new vendors onto the contract and remove ones that aren't meeting performance standards. And contract performance will be overseen and measured by VA program officials who plan to start implementing measures that value quality care over numbers of procedures performed.
VA will implement a comprehensive quality program for community care providers based on nationally recognized measures for the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality and the Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set. Contractors will track patient safety events, identify veterans at risk of avoidable visits and readmissions through predictive analytics, and while respecting their choice, guide veterans towards higher-performing providers. NextGen will modernize how VA pays its contractors for the care furnished to veterans by implementing value-based payment models. We will begin with episode-based payments for lower extremity joint replacements. As we gain the data and the expertise to manage alternative payments, we will introduce at least 3 additional models over the performance period of the contract to continually improve care. These models will shift payment away from volume and toward outcomes and total cost of care, which aligns contractor incentives with veterans' health and system sustainability. We will introduce utilization management This includes active management of inpatient admissions, emergency department use, concurrent hospital reviews, high-cost drugs administered in clinical settings. This will reduce unnecessary hospitalizations and inappropriate care while protecting veterans' access to medically necessary services.
But the department faced bipartisan skepticism during a hearing yesterday, partly because VA officials have been slow to detail their plans for the CCN Next Gen effort to members of Congress. VA's overseers on the House Veterans Affairs Committee say they found out the details of the contract at the same time vendors did, when the RFP was released a little over a month ago. Mike Bost is the committee's chairman.
I understand the VA finds it unprecedented to hold a hearing on an active contract solicitation. I appreciate the sensitivity of the contract, but it is also unprecedented to avoid Congress's oversight of $1 trillion of spending. My staff and the ranking member staff have been told that some topics are off limits because of the sensitive nature of the contract and solicitations. We've tried to create a venue in which VA would feel comfortable to speak candidly to our members, but unfortunately, VA failed to assure us of such candor.
Meanwhile, Democrats on the committee also worry that the new contract will serve as a way to further privatize VA health care, pointing out that more than 40% of veterans' care is already delivered by private providers through the existing contracts. Kentucky Congressman Morgan McGarvey worries the contract will lead to large, vertically integrated conglomerates driving veterans into facilities that they control and away from smaller, community-based providers.
I don't trust big insurance companies to take care of anybody. The sole thing that motivates them is profit. It's not people, and it's certainly not our veterans. And you can talk about $1 trillion and $2 trillion, and those are really big numbers that you can paper over in front of this committee. But until we're looking at those contracts and we're looking at those numbers, those are just assurances. And we have the right to be skeptical when we are talking about private insurance companies taking care of people, because right now they don't.
But Topping says the department believes it can avoid problems like the ones McGarvey's worried about through strong oversight and program management.
The vendors, our health plan partners on this, don't make the clinical referral from the direct care system to community care. VA does that. They don't make the referral to the provider. VA determines that. They don't determine eligibility. And so VA drives where and how our veterans receive care. We want to know what we're buying. We want to steer our veterans to the highest quality, lowest cost providers. Again, that's a goal that's not unique to VA. It's new to us, but we're bringing this into this program. We are going to make those determinations. Our vendors, our health plan partners on this don't drive that. VA does. We own our veterans, and we are accountable for their care.
Vendors hoping for a spot on the contract have until March 16th to submit their proposals. Jared Serbu, Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.
You can find Jared's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, an interesting case at the Court of Federal Claims could shape future energy savings performance contracts. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A case before the Court of Federal Claims highlights how shifting requirements in an energy savings performance contract project sparked a costly dispute and what it could mean going forward. Here to walk through the case and the lessons from it is partner at Haynes Boone, Zach Pritz. Zach, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here, Terry.
We're going to talk about this case, Siemens Government Technologies. But before we dive into the case and the court's decision, walk us through the basic premise here, which is about energy savings performance contracts. How do they work?
Sure. So the government, it has a lot of facilities around the country and around the world. Many of those facilities are a little dated, let's put it nicely. Where they waste huge amounts of energy just because the infrastructure is built decades and decades and decades ago. So as part of a way to try to modernize and save energy, they've developed two different mechanisms that are the real workhorses of modernizing in this regard. There are what we're dealing with here, which are energy savings performance contracts, and then there are utility energy savings contracts, or UESCs. This is more of the former, not the latter, but those are really the two mechanisms. So the way that these work is there's an IDIQ that will be held by a number of energy savings companies. Here, Siemens is one of them. the interested agency will go out and ask for quotes to put together a preliminary audit, or a preliminary assessment rather, which is really a high level review of the federal facility and suggestion of ways that the government can save money and the cost of doing it. This always has to be not just cost neutral, but has to have an actual savings to the government. And that savings is passed on then to the contractor. The preliminary assessment is itself an expensive process, but it's not nearly as expensive as the next part of this, which is if the government is interested in the preliminary assessment, they'll ask for a investment grade audit, or IGA, which is part of the task order award for the work itself. That can be millions of dollars. I mean, it takes tons of engineering time and real work from the contractor, and work that sometimes doesn't always get compensated if there's no ultimate award.
So it sounds like there are a lot of ways that these projects could get derailed. What specifically went wrong in the Siemens case?
Well, it's hard to tell reading just from the court's decision, but it appeared that DLA, which was administering this large project at the Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, changed some requirements after they had already received the first round of the investment grade audit from Siemens. They seemingly changed a ton of the assumptions that were used by Siemens to calculate the actual cost savings. And as Siemens put it, required a full-scale investment grade audit to be conducted again with a number of iterations that ended up costing somewhere north of $2 million.
That change in assumptions is interesting because as I read the case, it was almost 2 years from the initial request to Siemens' submission of their audit. And so many things could have changed. Does that make these kinds of projects a risky proposition?
They make them complicated. And the agency really needs to be focused on getting these projects done, getting the investment grade audit to be based on facts, not things that could rapidly change, which is, I think, what happened here, so that they understand what they're getting or what they might be getting and can execute the project.
So Siemens brought the case in the Court of Federal Claims. What was their argument?
So as sort of the background to this, the IGA often is not compensated when there's not a task order. And companies know that this is a risk that they're taking. The preliminary assessment is almost never compensated unless there's a task order. So they know it's a risk. But this is an unusual case because of how many iterations they went through with DLA just to then have the project totally canceled with nothing. So they brought some pretty interesting challenges here. They framed this as a bid protest primarily, as well as a breach of contract. So there was a contract, this IDIQ, with a task order for the preliminary assessment. That's where they brought a contract claim under. They said the government breached its obligations to administer a task order for the work itself under that IDIQ. So that's a contract dispute. They also said this was a improper administration of a task order award process where the government breached implied obligations to proceed in good faith and breached a variety of other statutes that really weren't discussed in the case. But they framed it as both contract disputes and a bid protest.
Speaking with Zach Prince, he's a partner at Haynes Boone. How did the government respond to those allegations?
Well, the government just asked for the whole thing to be dismissed, which it often does. The bid protest issues are the ones that they really focused on, and I thought were of particular interest for this case because it was really a novel approach to try to get compensation by Siemens. The government argued that there can't be a bid protest here under the court's bid protest jurisdiction because of what's known as the FASA task order bar. That is, there is some limit to the jurisdiction of the Court of Federal Claims to hear disputes, bid protest disputes, involving task orders. They either have no jurisdiction anywhere to have such bid protests or they have to go to GAO. But that limit has been hotly disputed and the subject of several Federal Circuit decisions, and the government lost that claim here.
And what else did the court have to say about Siemens' creativity?
The court was more focused on the government's attempt to trap Siemens by saying that either If there's a contract, an express contract, then they can't bring an implied in fact contract, which is one of their arguments they had brought as a bid protest, essentially. But also the government said there is no express contract that gives rise to relief. So as the court put it, it's heads, I win, tails, you lose type argument the government's trying to make. And it wasn't going to pass muster here, at least. The government might ultimately prevail, but this is a very preliminary stage, and the court was not willing to dismiss here.
So as you look at this case, what lessons do you draw for agencies and contractors around these kinds of projects?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and I've dealt with several of these contracts before. The contracting agencies often just don't have money to fund the preliminary assessment, and maybe don't have money to fund the investment grade audit either, everybody's hoping together that it will ultimately turn into a task order for the work. And these task orders might be massive, $50, $100+ million. We're talking about multi-year projects for modernizing large facilities. But you can't just proceed on hope. It always makes me as outside counsel nervous, but you as a government contractor or as a government agency, you have to have a good relationship with your contracted counterparts. And those relationships can really carry the day to get folks compensated when they otherwise might not have. You find money at the end of a fiscal year and you come up with some mod to make the contractor whole because you know you have to do business with them again and you appreciate the fairness of it. On the contractor side, you have to recognize that there is risk here. And if you're not going to get an actual written commitment from the government, and not just the government, of course, the authorized person from the government to fund one of these projects, you might be left holding the bag. So they can be lucrative projects for sure, but there is risk. And as always, the government has to proceed in good faith, which is Siemens' primary argument here, is the government just kept shifting around requirements, ignoring the fact that it was going to cost millions to do that, and then tried to leave Siemens with nothing. But you have to proceed with these projects with eyes wide open.
You mentioned risk there, especially for the bidders, but it seems like there's risk for all the parties, and it's not always clear that the potential revenue down the line will offset some of that risk. Is there a better way to structure these kinds of projects that would help everybody in the long run?
That's a great question. And I'm not just stalling because it's really complicated and I don't know the right answer. This is a really interesting mechanism to fund these types of projects. And the government likes it because they're not really left paying for anything. They save money and those savings pay the contractor ultimately. And even in the utility version of these types of contracts where it's structured a bit differently, it's still not coming out of present appropriations generally. It is a savings that the government's getting ultimately on its energy bills, and that's being passed on to pay for the project. That's a great way to do business. If the government doesn't have to actually pay for anything, they're not subject to ongoing appropriation problems, and they still can get what they need, that's fantastic. The problem is just at the outset of these projects, there are all sorts of complications that really need to be considered carefully by all parties.
I've been speaking with Zach Prince. He's a partner at Haynes Boone. Zach, thanks for bringing this case to our attention, and we'll look forward to the next step in its resolution.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, FedRAMP is getting faster. New automation and pilots promise approvals in months, not years. But first, an organization's new name signals a broader mission to support both Airmen and Guardians. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. After more than 80 years as the Air Force Aid Society, the nonprofit is rebranding as the Air and Space Forces Aid Society to reflect its commitment to both communities. Here to explain the change and what it means for military families is the CEO of AFAS, retired Air Force Major General Ed Thomas. Ed, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Terry. Good to be here.
Let's do first things first. Tell us about the Air and Space Forces Aid Society. What do you do?
The bottom line, Terry, is we take care of airmen, guardians, and their families. We've been doing it since 1942 as the World War II started to ramp up. all of the services have an organization like this. It is the official relief society of that service. Army Emergency Relief takes care of soldiers. Navy Marine Corps Relief takes care of Marines and sailors. Coast Guard Mutual Assistance takes care of coasties. We take care in the Air and Space Forces, now the Air and Space Forces Aid Society, we take care of Airmen, Guardians, and their families when they need us most.
And what sort of format does that aid take?
Well, we do several things. At the most basic level, we provide two basic forms of assistance. The first is grants. We did $4.5 million in scholarships last year. We did almost $5 million in disaster relief when Hurricanes Helene and Milton and other natural disasters hit parts of the United States where we had our service member station. So we do grants. We also do zero interest loans. Now, we're not a bank, but the reason we do zero interest loans is in some cases, it prevents our young, particularly our most junior enlisted folks, from going to a payday loan organization that's going to charge them 30, 39% interest. And we want to avoid that.
Well, the big news for us in this conversation is that you've added Space Force to the organization's name and logo. Tell us about why and what message you want to send with that.
Yeah, well, I would say, Terry, it is overdue that finally we have renamed ourselves the Air and Space Forces Aid Society. You know, I was on the air staff with General Goldfein, General Raymond, Secretary Wilson in 2019 on December 20th when we stood up the Space Force. And it wasn't like a 5-year planning ramp to create this new service. On day one, when President Trump signed the NDAA out at Andrews Air Force Base, we had a Space Force. It was a Space Force of one, General Raymond, but now it's ramped up to about 10,000 people. They're going to be ramping up to almost 3 times that size in the out years. And we need to recognize as the official aid organization of the Department of the Air Force who we serve. And we've been serving Guardians since day one. But we just want to make sure that we're connecting with those people that we're charged to help take care of, and that Airmen, Guardians, and their families know that we are here for them.
As you've built a support mechanism for Guardians, are you finding that force has needs that are different in scale or scope from airmen in general?
No, I would say for the most part, the needs are very, very similar. Most of our support is focused on our most junior enlisted, E1s to E4s, and the kinds of difficulties that our young service members are experiencing, whether they're Air Force, Space Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, they look very similar. It's simple things like not having any savings in their account when a financial crisis hits. Their Hyundai Santa Fe, they lose their engine on their 8-year-old car. Very expensive to fix, maybe one car for a family, and they just don't have the financial reserves. That's where we come in, help them get them back on their feet. Hopefully they'll never need us again, but we want to be there for these families, Space Force, Air Force, when they need us.
Is there something about this group of service members that you think most Americans don't understand? You've just mentioned some real significant financial challenges.
Yeah, Terry, thanks. I think there's several things, but I used to work for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, General Dempsey, one of my favorite people in the world. And he would very often say, our people are called to lead uncommon lives. And they are uncommon lives. I mean, you take an 18, a 20, a 22-year-old, they move away from their family, sometimes to the other side of the world. They leave their community, they leave their support, sources of support. Often they end up with all the change happening at once that adds a lot of financial stress, often adds a lot of mental or emotional stress, and all things people learn to deal with. I spent 33 years on active duty in the military, plus 4 years as a cadet, and I grew up in an Army family. I was kind of used to this, but we have a lot of people that are plucked out of their families and their homes across America, thrown into this military life across the country, across the world. And there's a lot of unique challenges and stressors that they just might not be prepared for.
I'm speaking with retired Air Force Major General Ed Thomas, who leads the Air and Space Forces Aid Society. Are there particular needs in the Air Force and the Guardians that you're meeting right now?
Absolutely. Some of the biggest needs that we meet on a day-to-day basis, and we're often doing them very quietly, is just basic living expenses. It's those airmen or guardians, their families that meet an unexpected financial crisis and they just don't have the reserves to deal with it. Sometimes it's rent, sometimes it's mortgage, particularly in high-cost living areas like New York or LA, where we're asking people to go relocate to. Sometimes it's auto repair. So there's a lot of those things that we're doing. And then one of the other things that we do that people don't often realize is just helping young airmen and guardians get back for emergencies. Let's say they're stationed in Kunsan, Korea, an hour and a half from Seoul, and they lose a family member, they have a family member that's terminally ill. Our U.S. government policies, while they're great and they help take care of our people, they don't pay for all of those things. So for a young airman to be able to pick up and move from one side, or take off and travel from one side of the world to the other to get there for a family emergency, they often need help and they often need support. We'll do that. We'll work with them. We work with the Red Cross. We'll pay for their flights. We'll get them home and make sure they're there when they need to be there, or in unfortunate cases, at least be there to say goodbye.
As you look forward to 2026, what are the priorities beyond the name change? Are there new programs or outreach initiatives or partnerships you're really excited about?
No, thanks. Yes to all of those things. We have probably made the biggest changes in the last, say, 6 or 7 months that we probably made in decades to the way we deliver our programs. And I'll tie that to our number one strategic priority, and that's just awareness. That's just making sure that we create and enhance the awareness across the force. So when airmen, especially people who are relatively new to the force, hit a snag, they know who to turn to. So some of the things that we've done is we've dramatically increased our child care support, money that goes to these young families to be able to help take care of children when they're deployed, when they're doing a permanent change of station from one assignment to another. Car seats is another. When we buy car seats for every E1 to E5 when they have a new child, wow. It's $250 that gets zailed straight into their account so that they can go get that car seat. We also just finished a program called Home for the Holidays, where we just spent more than $250,000 getting young single airmen from their location back to home to spend it with family and loved ones over the holidays. So that travel program is one of the things that we're really proud of, and we want to make sure that we can reunite our service members with their families, particularly at times like this.
As we wrap up here, I want to give you the opportunity to make a call to action. What can the public or industry do to help you move the needle?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Terry, is the awareness piece. While we need funds and we need to fundraise, we want to make sure that all of our service members know that we're here to help them. That's where my passion is, and that's where I want to make sure people know how to come to us in times of need. It's not only good for those service members and their families, but it's good for the readiness of the nation. Now, also, I'll never turn down an opportunity for help. AFAS.org, AFAS.org. If people go there, they can either click a button that says, hey, I need help, or click a button that says, I want to support. There are certainly a lot of young junior airmen and guardians of their families that we can use with your help. So thank you, Terry.
I've been speaking with retired Air Force Major General Ed Thomas, who leads the Air and Space Forces Aid Society. Thanks so much for sharing the work of this important organization with us today.
Terry, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, FedRAMP is getting faster. New automation and pilots promise approval in months, not years. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. With FedRAMP 20X and the 2026 Phase 2 pilot, the government is moving toward automation, machine-readable evidence, and collaborative monitoring. We'll explore what these changes mean for software as a service providers and how companies can cut costs and timelines without sacrificing security with Irina Denisenko, CEO of Knox Systems. Irina, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Terry, for having me. Excited to be here.
We're going to talk about one of everybody's favorite topics, FedRAMP. It's been around for years, but agencies are still struggling to get modern tools. So from your perspective, why is the process so hard for software as service companies to get through?
It's a great question. Why is it so hard to get through FedRAMP? It is so hard to get through FedRAMP because at the end of the day, what is FedRAMP really here to do? It's here to secure cloud software, to secure government data sitting in cloud software. You have to remember, this all came together almost 15 years ago, which if you remember 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was kind of early days of all of us interacting with the internet. And, we were still even in some cases scared to enter our credit card details onto an online website. Fast forward to today, we, pay with our face when we get on our phone. We've come a long way. But the reality is cloud security hasn't always been of course, it's secure. In fact, it's been the opposite. Of course, it's unsecure, and it's the internet, and that's where you go to lose all your data and all your information. And so long story short, you have to understand that's where the government's coming from. We need to lock everything down in order to make sure that whether it's VA patient data, IRS data on our taxpayers, obviously anything in the DOW, any sort of information data there, all of that stays secure. And so that's why there are hundreds of controls that are applied to cloud environments in order to make sure and double sure and triple sure that data is secure.
You lived the challenge firsthand with your own company. What most surprised you about the certification process when you tackled it yourself?
What most surprised me when we tackled FedRAMP ourselves for the first time was that even if you have the resources, and specifically if you have $3 million to spend, $3 million burning a hole in your pocket doesn't happen often. But even if you have that, and you have the staff on the U.S. soil, and you have the willingness to invest all of that for a 3-year process to get certified, that is still not enough. What you need on top of that is an agency to say yes to sponsoring you. And when they say yes to sponsoring you, what they are saying yes to is to take on your cyber risk. And specifically what they're saying yes to is to spend $500,000 of taxpayer money, of agency budget, typically using contractors, to do an initial security review of your application, and then to basically get married to you and do something called continuous monitoring, which is a monthly meeting that they're going to have with you forever, where that agency is going to be your accountability partner and ultimately the risk bearer of you, the software provider, to make sure you are burning down all of the vulnerabilities, all of these CVEs, every finding in your cloud environment on the timeline that you're supposed to do that. And that ends up costing an agency about $250,000 a year, again, in the form of contractors, tooling, et cetera. That was the most surprising to me, that again, even as a cloud service provider who's already doing business with JP Morgan and Chase, healthcare systems, you name it, even that's not enough. You need an agency sponsor, because at the end of the day, it's the agency's data and they have to protect it. And so they have to do that triple assurance of, yes, you said you're doing the security stuff, but let us confirm that you're doing the security stuff. That was the most surprising to me, and why really ultimately we started Knox Systems, because what we do at Knox is we enable the inheritance model. So we are doing all of that with our sponsoring agencies, of which we have 15. Knox runs the largest FedRAMP managed cloud. And what that means is we host the production environment of our customers inside of our FedRAMP environment across AWS, Azure, and GCP. And our customers inherit our sponsors. So they inherit the authorization from the Treasury, from the VA, from the Marines, et cetera, which means that the Marines, the Treasury, the VA didn't have to spend an extra $500,000 upfront and $250K ongoing with every new application that was authorized. They are able to get huge bang for their buck by just investing that authorization, that sponsorship into the Knox boundary, and then Knox does the work and the hard work to ensure the security and ongoing authorization and compliance of all of the applications that we bring into our environment.
I'm speaking with Irina Denisenko. She's the CEO of Knox Systems. So it sounds like you found a way through the maze that was shorter, simpler, less expensive. Is FedRAMP 20X helping to normalize that kind of approach? How do you see it playing out?
Great question. FedRAMP 20X is a phenomenal initiative coming out of OMB GSA. And really the crux of that is all about machine readable and continuous authorization. Today, when I talked about continuous monitoring, that's a monthly meeting that happens. And I kid you not, we as a cloud service provider, again, we secure Adobe's environment and many others, we come with a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet that has all of the vulnerabilities listed from all the scans we've done over the last month and anything that is still open from anything prior months. And we review that spreadsheet, that actual Excel document, and then after the meet with our agencies, and then after that meeting, we upload that spreadsheet into a system called USDA on the FedCiv side, EMAS, DOW side, DISA side, and then they on their side download that spreadsheet and they put it into other systems. And I mean, that's the process. I think no one is confused or no one would argue that surely there's a better way. And a better way would be a machine readable way, whether that's over an API, using a standard language like OSCAL. There's lots of ways to standardize, but it doesn't have to be, basically the equivalent of a clipboard and a pencil. And that's what FedRAMP 20X is doing. It's automating that information flow so that not only is it, brings down the amount of just human labor that needs to be done to do all this tracking, but more importantly, this is cloud security. Just because you're secure 1 second doesn't mean you're secure 5 seconds from now, right? You need to be actively monitoring this, actively reporting this. And if it's taking you 30 days to let an agency know that you have a critical vulnerability, that's crazy. You got to tell them in, 5 minutes after you find out, or, to put a respectable buffer, a responsible buffer to allow you to remediate before you notify more parties. Maybe it's a 4-day buffer, but it's certainly not 30 days. That's what FedRAMP 20X is doing. We're super excited about it. We're very supportive of it and have been actively involved in phase 1 and all subsequent phases.
Right. So phase 2 is scheduled to start shortly in 2026. What are you expecting to see as a result?
Well, phase 1 was all about FedRAMP low. Phase 2 is all about FedRAMP moderate. And we expect that, it's going to really, FedRAMP moderate is the realistically where most cloud service offerings sit, FedRAMP moderate and high. And so that's really the one that FedRAMP needs to get right. What we expect to see and hope to see is to have agencies actually authorize off of these new frameworks. The key is really going to be, what shape does FedRAMP 20X take in terms of machine readable reporting on the security posture of any cloud environment. And then, of course, the industry will standardize around that. So we're excited to see what that looks like. And also how much AI does the agency, the GSA, OMB, and ultimately FedRAMP leverage, because there is a tremendous amount of productivity, but also security that AI can provide. It can also introduce a lot of risk. And so we're all collaborating with that agency, as well as we're excited to see where they draw the bright red lines and where they embrace AI.
So phase 2 is only going to incorporate 10 companies, right? So for the rest of the world who's waiting on these results, what advice do you have for them in the meantime? How can companies prepare better, or how can companies who want to get FedRAMP certified now best proceed?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the inheritance model that Knox provides, and we're not the only ones. It's actually, there's 2 key players. It's ourselves and Palantir. There's a reason that large companies like Celonis, like OutSystems, like Big ID, like Armis, who was just bought by ServiceNow for almost $8 billion. There's a reason that all of those guys choose Knox, and there's a reason Anthropic chose Palantir and Grafana chose Palantir, because regardless, FedRAMP 20X, Rev 5 doesn't matter. There is a massive premium put on getting innovative technology in the hands of our government faster. We have a window right now with the current administration prioritizing innovative technology and commercial off the shelf, take the best out of Silicon Valley and use it in the government, or out of Europe, out of Israel, you name it, rather than, build it yourself, customize it till you're blue in the face and still get an inferior product. Just use the best in breed, right? But you need it to be secure. And we have this window as a country. We have a window as a country for the next few years here to get these technologies in. It takes a while to adopt new technologies. It takes a while to do a quantum leap. But I'll give you a perfect example. Celonis, since becoming FedRAMPed on August 19th with Knox, they had been trying to get FedRAMPed for 5 years. Since getting FedRAMPed on August 19th, has implemented 3 agencies. And what do? They do process mining and intelligence. They're an $800 million company that's 20 years old, that competes, by the way, head-on with Palantir's core product, Foundry and Gotham and so on. They've implemented 3 agencies already to drive efficiency, to drive visibility, to drive process mining, to drive intelligence, to drive AI-powered decision-making. And that's during the holidays, during a government shutdown. It's speed that we've never seen before. If you want outcomes, you need to get these technologies into the hands of our agencies today. And so that's why, we're such big proponents of this model, and also why, our agencies, our Federal Advisory Board, which includes the DHS CISO, the DOW CIO, the VA CIO, are also supportive of this, because ultimately it's about serving the mission and doing it now rather than waiting for some time in the future.
I've been speaking with Irina Denisenko. She's the CEO of Knox Systems. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. While Congress is largely backing the Defense Department's efforts to overhaul its acquisition system, lawmakers are pushing back on some of the Pentagon's reform requests. They're also concerned that the department's workforce cuts will cripple its ability to implement the reform agenda. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more detail. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
How does Congress strongly support the defense acquisition reform agenda, but also have some concerns?
Yeah, so last year, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced the Pentagon's plans to embrace more aggressive acquisition reforms. And as part of that overhaul, he directed the department to improve budget flexibility. If additional authorities are needed, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, along with the military services, would have to come up with a legislative engagement plan, is what they called it in that memo, that would ensure that Congress is aligned with any proposed reforms that came from the Defense Department that would require statutory change. And in response, appropriators said that they assessed the acquisition reforms Hegseth laid out in that memo and came to the conclusion that those are internal in nature and that the Defense Department needs to demonstrate progress on those internal procedures first before seeking any additional authorities or changes to the current appropriations framework. So, for example, lawmakers said that above-threshold transfer and reprogramming requests are often slowed down because of the department, because they spend a lot of time waiting on additional details from the department, and that really slows down the process. So Congress wants to see them improve on that before they seek any additional flexibilities.
And is that guidance all consistent with the changes that they did approve in the National Defense Authorization Act?
Yes, it is. So, for example, for the Army, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, they approved all 13 budget line item consolidation requests that Army made for fiscal 2026. And they did say that, they support budget line item consolidation when the Department of Defense provides enough justification in a timely manner.
Well, let's get into the Army's proposal then, because they have been trying to make a case for more agile funding. How has Congress responded to that request?
Yes, they've been advocating for that for months, and the Army actually asked Congress to raise notification threshold for reprogramming and transfers from $15 million to $50 million for procurement programs and to $25 million for research and development efforts. Appropriators said that the department already has enough authorities to restructure their internal programming and budgeting processes, and that the challenges with execution can be solved within the department without congressional involvement and without statutory change. They also said that increasing programming thresholds alone will probably not solve program execution challenges. It will probably not improve that. And they also added at the very end that they actually discourage the defense secretary and service secretaries from submitting future requests of this nature.
So what other risks are they flagging then as the Defense Department's acquisition reform effort moves forward?
There are a couple. I will highlight the workforce because it's a big one. And they said that the workforce is the linchpin of this reform. But at the same time, DoD leaders have been expressing concern about their acquisition workforce and whether the workforce has the tools to execute this reform. And then lawmakers kind of echoed that sentiment in the spending bill, saying that they're concerned that workforce cuts, and I quote, will affect the Defense Department's ability to achieve the initial speed and agility sought by this reform effort.
And so did Congress give the Defense Department specific tasks or next steps?
Yeah, so for example, for the workforce piece, lawmakers want Hegseth, along with the service secretaries, to have an acquisition workforce strategy, and they want them to include a comprehensive assessment of the personnel needs to execute Hegseth's agenda. And on the budget flexibility piece, lawmakers want to work with DoD on improving the amount of details that they provide to Congress in their reprogramming submissions so the process can move a lot faster than it currently does.
There are a lot of acquisition reform trains seeming to be running on different tracks altogether. Do you have a feeling that DoD is going to be able to pull all of this together into comprehensive system reform?
You know, when I spoke to acquisition experts, one thing that keeps coming up and that came up in the spending bill as well is the workforce. And the Defense Department has attempted reforms of this scale previously. And what I keep hearing is ultimately it all kind of didn't really stick because of the workforce didn't adjust. And that's what I keep hearing, is that it's not clear whether they have the levels of workforce and whether they have the tools to take the risks, kind of the tools and the confidence to take the risks that Congress and Hegseth want them to take through these reforms.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thank you for the update. We'll be watching all of these reforms as they roll out.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.